Hello and welcome to the H2P Podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Gary Morgan. With me, as always, is the beat writer for Pitt Athletics and Steelers coverage as well, Corey Crisan over at DK Pittsburgh Sports. How you doing, sir?
He wants it pronounced Veilleux and not Veilleux. He
All
clarified it
right.
today, folks. So, contrary to what his own father says, his own father has said it's like Lemieux. No, it's not, according to Christian.
So I didn't screw up a couple weeks ago then?
But that's the thing is dad's saying one thing and son is saying the other. So,
oh, man.
Look, I'm not pointing anything else out other than what is right in front of me, and that is dad says one thing, son says the other, and the dispute happens to be over the last name and how it's pronounced.
Well, that
Christian
sounds a
says
lot
it's
like
Veilleux.
maybe that's why he's so well equipped to deal with Narduzzi and Signetti, because they're always having a mom and dad fight, aren't they? It seems like in the media. Pat Narduzzi plays volleyball on a level that he might be trying out for the women's team here. The way he's been knocking balls over at Signetti, right? Everything is on him. He made the decision with this quarterback. He's the one that benched Phil Jakovic. He's the one that decided Christian Veilleux is the right guy. I just think that's odd. First of all, I don't like when a head coach defers things that are very clearly head coaching decisions off on coordinators. I don't see this marriage lasting beyond this season, almost regardless of what happens the rest of the way out. How about you, Corey?
I don't either. Now, for those that missed it, on Monday, Pat Narduzzi officially named Christian Veilleux, as Alan puts in the live chat here on DK Pittsburgh Sports. A reminder, we're live 6 to 6:30 every Wednesday to talk Pitt sports here on DK Pittsburgh Sports on YouTube. And then, of course, where podcasts are found later. So Monday, Pat Narduzzi makes it official that Christian Veilleux, where is it down here, is going to start against Louisville for Pitt this weekend. Phil Dracovic benched. However, he is not going to move to the tight ends room. Pat Narduzzi emphatically swatted down that report that came from an outside source to not me. So Saturday is going to be, as we talked about last week, Gary, the start of what's next to come for this Pitt football program. They're
Right.
1-4. They're going nowhere. There's really not many positives, if any, to build this season off of right now. You're making a quarterback change in week 6, or week 7, I guess, with the bye week. So with a couple of months left in the season, like we're a month and a half away from the season being over.
Sure.
Pitt still has to win 5 games to be bowl eligible. And, oh, by the way, they play at Notre Dame, Florida State, Syracuse at Yankee Stadium's not a gimme, at Duke. Like, there's a lot of losable games coming up on the schedule. So what do? You have to provide a spark somehow. And the thing about Christian is, to me, I think he's just quicker to release the football than Phil is at minimum. And I think he makes better decisions quicker than Phil does. And we'll have to see that come to the field on Saturdays. But something had to be done. It's official. It's rubber stamped. It was so official that Christian spoke with media today. Now, I was over on the other side of the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex chatting with one Matt Canada today. So I was not present for the Veilleux special. So I will have something on the site tomorrow on Thursday about Christian Veilleux and the quarterback swap. But this is it, Gary. This is the start. This is what we've kind of been waiting for by this point because they had to make this move.
They did. And I mean, I think bowl eligibility is probably a long shot at this point. I think with Christian Veilleux, though, I agree with you on the quick release. I think we have seen that in the short spurts that we've actually gotten to see him throw footballs. I think you can probably expect more mistakes because I think that was a lot of Phil's problem. He was afraid to do anything. Like, there was just really no effort to even try to make mistakes. I think we're going to see probably some interceptions that don't look so great, and maybe trying to do something that you shouldn't try to do. young quarterback stuff. It's been a while, really, at Pitt since we've gotten to do that. We've kind of been bringing in these guys that were ready, or we had Kenny, but he felt like a senior for 3 years, So it's been a long time since we've kind of grown with a quarterback. I would just encourage patience from people and realize that it wasn't all Phil's fault either. The team itself is kind of not really stacked right now.
Not right now. Real quick, Alan asked if Veilleux is injured, does a quarterback whose name should not be spoken go into the game? That would be Phil. I'm not so sure who the backup is at this rate. Now, I think it's going to be Phil, but here's another thing. You have to see what you have in Nate Yarnell at some point because the transfer portal is right there. I'm not saying he's going to use it, but it's an option for him if he wants to.
Yeah.
You have to find out what you have in Nate Yarnell at some point. And obviously the Western Michigan game is a long, long time ago by this point that he played last year and just game managed his way through. And, you have to wait and see on Nate Yarnell. But to your point, Gary, about the quarterbacks and kind of like this bridge, I guess, between Kenny Pickett and this next generation of Christian Veilleux and Nate Yarnell, the bridge being Keaton Slovis into Phil Dracovic. I wrote last week the Keaton Slovis story because, quite frankly, he was right. They wanted to bring Phil in to compete with him, and he said no thanks and left, and he was right to do that. And now you have to wonder about the approach that this coaching staff, Pat Narduzzi, Frank Cignetti, is going to take with Christian Veilleux. We talked about last week about kind of what the expectation is. And what do you want to see from Christian? What can we realistically see from Christian in these final, couple of months here? And one way or another, the conclusion that I think we both came to was, Frank Cignetti, he's under a microscope right now.
Should be.
And
yeah.
I don't think a resurrection, so to speak, of his offense can come from Christian. Regardless of how Christian does, I think the coordinator still has to be addressed in the offseason.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that comes directly with a firing, but I even asked Pat, like you heard me ask Pat Narduzzi after the Virginia Tech game, like at this stage, do you just analyze the whole offense of what Frank's doing and what he's rolling out there and what he's calling and his game plans? And that has to be taken into consideration at some point. This is now pattern behavior with Frank Cignetti.
Yeah.
And happened with Keaton Slovis, and it's happened now with Phil Dracovic. And if it happens again with Christian, you have to look at the offseason and say, this guy is not the right offensive coordinator to be running this offense and getting the post-Kenny Pickett era off the ground, so to speak.
Yeah, and I would say maybe a larger point that I'm trying to make is I would think going to a quarterback, a freshman, as far as experience goes, quarterback at this stage and watching the head coach kind of lay track for it on a weekly basis leads me to believe the decision's already been made that's going to be moved on from, just not vocally. Now, that's a fan. I know you're not going to be able to camp onto that or anything, but that's just where I'm headed with it instead of dancing around the subject. I think that's really it. We'll look forward to seeing how it turns out this week and be patient. And again, I think the quarterback play in and of itself is probably going to prevent too much more Cignetti analyzing.
It's going to have to. And there's only so much that I think Christian is going to be able to do throughout these last couple of months. Like, the offense is fairly limited as it is, and it doesn't have a running game, and the offensive line's banged up, and the tight ends aren't being used. There's a lot to figure out that Frank Cignetti has to go to. Gary, let's take a break, and then when we come back, let's get to basketball, huh?
It's time. It's time. All right, we're back to the H2P Podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports. Corey and Gary with you, and it's time for basketball. We love this. I mean, we're going to refrain from doing the CBS theme song this time, but when we hear it, let's just say that Corey and I both get excited. So we're ready, and we're coming up on it, man. I mean, we're only a couple weeks away from the first game, and I thought last week we started a little bit with talking about Will Jeffress. I wanted to kind of preview what fans could expect from this team, maybe who we thought our starting five would be, We'll go through the positions and we'll talk about some players we expect to see, players we expect to not see, and work our way through the team and get you ready for whatever we're calling this. What do you call it? 23-24 Panthers? Is that how they do it?
23-24, essentially, yeah.
All right. So let's start at point guard, man, because point guard's interesting, right? We already know what we lost.
Is it ever? Is it ever? Wow. I mean,
it's Ish Leggett, right? He's the starter.
Ish Leggett. You can look at Jalen Lowe. There's options at point guard right now, but the options are way different than we thought. Of course, losing Nelly Cummings, right? Like, that's the start of it. And then Dior Johnson, with everything that went through with him and him not being here anymore, is throwing a wrench into a lot of what Pitt maybe planned on doing as far as design and how this team is going to rotate and what these guards are going to become, because now Pitt has to rely on not just Ish Leggett, but also Carlton Carrington and Jalen Lowe, the two freshmen. And there's a lot of excitement from within that building about Jalen Lowe and his ability as a scorer at the one. And the thing is, what made Nelly Cummings so good last year was not just his ability to shoot the three and to spot shoot at times and score when he needed to, but I think Nelly's vision was underrated and underappreciated for what this team and its capabilities were. This team was short on true point guards last year. It had Nelly Cummings, it had Nike Sabandy, it had Jamarius Burton that were able to move the ball up the floor. You're losing all three of those. So somebody has to be the floor general. Somebody has to be able to take the ball and run with it. And I think right now that's Jalen Lowe. I think Ish Leggett plays more of a smaller two than a Jalen Lowe would, or even a Carlton Carrington. I think Carrington plays more of a two, but I think Leggett is going to have some freedom at moving the ball and handling the ball and bringing it up the floor along with Jalen. I think Jalen's going to be the focal point now at the one.
Sure. Okay, so we'll get to the shooting guard then. You have Carrington
and Ish. And look, there's going to be some interesting lineup combinations, because I would argue along the opposite line of last year, where last year's team was very guard heavy, right?
Yes.
Nelly, Nike, JB, Elliott. You could consider Blake Hinson kind of a both if you want. This team was really reliant on its guards. And now the 23-24 team is going to be the opposite. They're going to rely on this front court to make more plays than the backcourt. Now, the backcourt is going to have to pick up a lot of production that's lost with the guys that we're talking about. So, Carrington, Ish Leggett, do you move a Zach Austin? And they got a couple other transfers, but really they're just the bench guys. I mean, the impact guys at the two are going to be Carrington and Leggett, I think. There's a couple of transfers that came in like late, but this was an issue for Capel with Johnson leaving. Like, this is the hole that Johnson leaves, is you can't necessarily play Ish Leggett and Carlton Carrington both at the two. You kind of have to pick and choose that fight. Do you play one at the one or one at the two when one sits on the bench? And like this guard rotation primarily of Lowe, Leggett, and Carrington is going to have to eat up a lot of minutes for Pitt this year.
I'm actually wondering if that's going to force them to think about using. I don't think it's ideal, but I think they might have to think about using Will Jeffers at shooting guard on occasion.
That's very possible. And like, Will's probably too long, quote unquote, too long for that by just general standard. But this tracks back to a really deep front court. Now, look, Pitt has options to play, like Marlon Barnes at forward, at small forward. They got Michael Hewitt, the UNC Greensboro transfer, UNC Greensboro and Old Dominion. Like, that's a player they're probably going to have to lean on. They got Jawan Nelson in the front court now. Zach Austin, 6'7", so could you slide him in at the two? Like, they're going to have to really figure out these rotations. In my opinion, the two is the weakest spot on the roster right now.
I was going to ask you if you thought it was that or the point guard now. It's one or the other, right? I mean,
I would say so. I think it's the two. I think I would trust might be a bad word. I would think Jalen Lowe is going to be more impactful at his position than perhaps Ish Leggett, Carlton Carrington, Hewitt, whoever plays that two. Like, could Hewitt play the one? I think theoretically, yes. But that guard depth is just not what it was last year, which is, I mean, we're going to talk about the front court and the forwards here soon. Like, I think this team is going to have to run through its forwards.
Yeah, they're going to have to definitely be a set offense, more like type team that likes to get the ball down low. And for that, it's going to take a good center. So, we have three returning centers, really. We got Guillermo, Diaz-Graham, Federico, and Jorge.
Yep.
Those are the three, right? I mean, in a pinch, I've seen them go small and use Hinson down there, and we may see some of that at times, but I doubt it with this backcourt again.
Right.
What do you think of that center mix?
If Pitt had Papa Conte, this would be a pun intended slam dunk position. Like, you could mix the power forwards in with this too, like, with Zach Austin if you wanted to, or Blake Hinson, whatever you consider Blake. Like, I almost feel like Federico starting at center, the more I think about it, Federico starting at center, Austin at the 3 and Hinson at the 4 makes more sense. I know we talked about Pitt hoops a bit ago on the last show, and I was like, Guillermo at the 4, and I just don't know if that's the best idea with Federico at the 5. Like, Federico is going to start at the 5, but it's a matter of how are they going to divvy up that rotation. Like, right now, sitting here on October 11th, with a few weeks until the season starts, I almost feel like the best starting 5 right now, the more I think about it, is Lowe, Leggett, Austin, Hinson, Federico. And I think when you have a front court depth of, you have Guillermo, Jorge, man, if Papa Conte was in there, it'd be so much easier, wouldn't it?
Well, he's not, though. I mean,
I know, but I keep thinking back to it.
The best laid plans, man. Like, I'm struggling with my starting 5 as well. I think that's why I wanted to go through it positionally, as opposed to just listing off players, because I think when you look at it positionally, you almost lock yourself in.
Sure.
So let's jump over to small forward then. You keep saying Zach Austin. I think, that's probably the pick there. What else do you got? You got Jeffress.
That's it right there.
Yeah.
That's it right there. I mean, you think about the 3 position. I think starting Austin and rolling Jeffress in as a combo forward, a 3-4 and a 3 and a 4, sometimes at the 2, is going to be the best solution. And as far as we're concerned, Jorge Diaz-Graham is still working back from a off-season injury, so that's going to shuffle more bodies up to the 4. So right now, I think if you start Zach Austin and you roll Will Jeffress out as your 6th man, almost like the anti-Nike Sabandi, if you will. Like, where Nike was hyper-offensive, it feels like Will's going to be more defensive than anything. He's going to be able to pick up the team's best ball handler and pick up the team's best shooter if you need him. Like, I think that's the best idea for the 3, and then you put Blake at the 4. I think that's where Jeff Capel is most likely to go, and I think that's the lineup in the front court that would best suit Pitt to start the year.
Yeah, and I would also say, like, Guillermo, I think, can probably handle playing a little bit of power forward if he has to, or even small forward he can handle if he has to in a pinch. But if you only have 2 centers, you can't do that.
Right.
So I mean, without Jorge, that changes a whole other dimension.
So Alan asks a couple of questions from YouTube. Reminder, we're live on YouTube as well as we do these. Will Pitt enter conference play undefeated? So let's just go through up until December real quick, right? NC-A&T should be a win. Binghamton, Florida Gulf Coast, Jacksonville. I don't see any problem starting 4-0. Then you look at Florida and Missouri. Those are in Brooklyn. Those are tough ones to win. I'm not going to pencil anything quite yet. And then Clemson visits December 3rd before Pitt has to go to West Virginia, go to Morgantown right after that for a 9 o'clock tip-off, by the way. Goodness. 9 o'clock tip-off. Then Canisius, South Carolina State, Fort Wayne, and then Pickens and ACC play. I'll have to see how Florida, Missouri, and Clemson and West Virginia start. I think they'll beat West Virginia. But that little block right there between November 22 and December 3, Florida and Missouri in Brooklyn, and then Clemson at home. those are not easy games. And Clemson was really good against Pitt last year, if you remember.
They were.
Clemson was really good. Now, they lost a couple of big pieces. There's no doubt about that. A couple of guys went and got drafted. But Clemson usually gives Pitt a game. Brad Brownell is a really good coach over at Clemson.
Right.
For my money, one of the top maybe 4 in the ACC. So I wouldn't.
They're also a team that
count
doesn't
on
use
that.
the portal to build. They tend to build internally.
They do.
At Clemson, so that's always a different kind of team. But Notre Dame was always like that in ACC play.
You know what was weird was seeing Mike Bray on the Atlanta Hawks sideline in the preseason with like the Hawks jacket on, and he's just sitting on the sideline on the bench. It looks so weird seeing him in, anything but Notre Dame. Real quick before we take another break, Alan asks, what new player should I be most excited for this year? For me, it's Zach Austin. I think there's a lot of athleticism to like. I think they like him as that athletic wing. I think he's going to be able to shoot it. I think he'll be able to dunk it. I think he'll be able to do just about anything that Pitt wants him to do at that 3.
I mean, for me, if your goal of excitement is getting into the tournament, you better hope that it's low.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he's something, then the team could be something. But I think he needs to be something. He's that important back there. So let's go ahead and take that next break. Come back, talk about our proposal for starting 5, huh? All right, we're back to the H2P Podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports. Corey and Gary, and we're going to take a feeble attempt at talking about the starting 5 here. And I think, Corey, let's give ourselves a little bit of grace. Let's do the starting 6. I think that
Sure.
I think that gives you the first guy off the bench, and I think that makes this discussion a little bit easier. Probably.
It almost feels like too that Jeff Capel could do something like this, where the 5 doesn't, not the 5th position, where the 5th man, so to speak, doesn't play starter minutes. Like this could almost be like a Greg Elliott, Nike Sabandy type of deal. Now, I think that comes in the form of Zach Austin / whoever starts at the 2 with Will Jeffress. Like, I think Jalen Lowe, as we sit here, Jalen Lowe, Blake Hinson, and Federico are guaranteed starter minutes per game, right? 33, 34 minutes a game, right? Whatever it is. And then from there, how do you allocate? I think the 2 and the 3 are the most interesting spots to allocate because you can look at Carrington, Leggett, Austin, Jeffress, and Barnes. Those 5 players mixing in at the 2 and the 3. Like, I almost feel like Leggett starts at the 2 and Austin at the 3. And then you give more minutes to Jeffress in situations, defense particularly. And then you can kind of figure out Carrington and Barnes from there with the 2 freshmen. That's how I almost feel like it should go to start the season. So right now, if we had to put a starting 5 on the floor on October 11th, I would go Jalen Lowe, Ish Leggett, Zach Austin, Blake Hinson, and Federico. And then your backups, your backup 5 for me would be Carrington. Oh my gosh. Carrington, Barnes, Jeffress, Jorge, Guillermo. That's how it almost feels like it has to go.
That makes sense to me. I think that's the way I'd have to go too. Almost to a letter. So I guess I just have nothing else to say about that. I'm really excited to watch the season, but my expectations are about where they were last year. So I'm hoping to be pleasantly surprised. Again, I mean, on paper, I'm not seeing it. But I'll be honest, I didn't see it last year either.
Well, and that's what made last year so fun was nobody saw this coming. Right? Like Jeff Capel's dead in the water. There's no way this program gets revived. He's starting 5 transfers out of 5 positions. Like there's no way in hell this team could be good. And then they were really good. They were really damn good. And everybody bought into what Jeff Capel did. And everybody bought into the buy-in. And everybody found a way to have a role, to suck up their pride and play good basketball. And they won key games. Like the game at North Carolina, they won key games. And they were in key games all year. The win against Virginia at home was huge. Sweeping North Carolina. Now, Jeff Capel kind of owns North Carolina, but that's besides the point. like Pitt found ways to win games they were not supposed to win down the stretch. And the fact that this team was one win away from taking first place in the ACC into the tournament, nobody saw that coming. Like
Right.
anybody could sit here months after the fact and say, oh yeah, that team had it coming. No, it didn't. Nobody saw what last year happened coming, which is why you can't sit here today and look at this year and say there's no way they could do this, because yes, there is a way they could do this. They just did it. So that's what makes this whole thing exciting. Now, my expectations are tempered because of the losses. Like, you lose Nelly, Nike, Greg Elliott, JB, you lose those 4 major pieces. That's hard for any team. 4 of the top 6 scorers are gone. That's hard for any team, including the ACC Sixth Man of the Year, to overcome. So there's a lot to overcome. Now, I don't think they're the 14th best team in the ACC either. I vehemently disagreed with the preseason poll. I think they're somewhere between like the 8 to 10 range at minimum. And I think they're good enough they're good enough, in my opinion, to play for a one step by in the ACC tournament. And then from there, you kind of shuffle down. I don't think this is an I don't think this is an NCAA tournament team. Now, NIT, CBI, whatever, side tournament they might get, possibly. But I don't think this is an NCAA tournament team as we sit here on October 11th.
And again, we said a lot of these same things last year. I think that's that is what is fun about it. I'm interested to just watch them start this year. I felt like they were slow starters, and it took them a while to come together last year. And this is a lot of new parts again, so I wouldn't be shocked if we kind of experienced that. Plus, even for Blake Hinson, this is going to be a different offense, Corey. It's not going to be the same. They played a lot of backyard ball.
Oh yeah,
last year, and that is not going to be the case this year if they're going to be successful. I think they're going to have to run a structured offensive set.
You know what? And that goes along with the front court, with the strong front. You said it in the previous segment. This team hinging on its front court means not as much transition, not as much speed, and transition, I think, is going to be a huge thing for this team on both sides of the floor.
Right.
Are they going to be able to put up the transition points like they were able to last year? They were a really good offensive team in transition. They loved to run the floor last year. I don't know how well you could do that with these new guards. I just don't know. This isn't saying they can't.
Right.
I just don't know, because we haven't seen Jalen Lowe, Carlton Carrington, Ish Leggett, and so forth on the floor together. Michael Hewitt and so forth on the floor together. Now, I'm not saying being a set offense is a bad thing, but I think what this roster does as it's currently composed is it's going to challenge Jeff Capel to be more creative in the half-court offense. It's going to have to challenge Blake Hinson to make some tough shots. It's going to have to challenge Will Jeffress to be more of an offensive threat and drive and kick out and create, almost like JB did. It's going to have to challenge Ish Leggett to make threes. It'll challenge Jalen. I think this team is going to face a lot of early season challenges. I'm not saying it's all going to be together, but I also don't think you see the really horrible start like you saw the last season when they got destroyed by West Virginia, destroyed by Michigan, and have that forgetful, VCU game. I think there's going to be more cohesion because of the Capel system. I just don't know how fluid it's going to look, at least in the first couple of weeks in the season.
Okay, so let's say everything falls apart. The whole thing doesn't work. What's the reason?
Wow. I would think the reason would be the freshmen, right? What you have. Okay, let's organize this, okay? You know what you have in Federico, the twins, and Blake Hinson and Will Jeffress, right? That's 5 players off the rip, okay? You don't know what you have in the fresh. I mean, you could say all you want. These freshmen are talented. They're 4-star prospects, this, that, and the other. You could say that till the cows come home. But they still have to play college basketball. So, Lowe, Carrington, Barnes, you could throw Leggett in there because he's young. I think the 4 of those is going, their production is going to be so crucial to not just the start of the season, but the longevity of the season. Can they start hot? Can they keep it going consistently? I think to answer your question directly like that, if it falls apart, it's because the freshmen don't pan out.
Boom.
And then we start talking about Capel's recruiting and who he's looking at and who he's bringing in. And because right now we can trust the front court. We can trust that Jeff Capel knows how to recruit the portal based on what just happened last year when he took a starting lineup of 4 portal guys fresh out of the portal and went to an NCAA tournament with them. We could say he knows how to recruit the portal. We could say this front court's really good. We can't say right now that these freshmen are going to pan out. We just can't.
And I'm going to guess if I flipped the script and I said everything goes right, what's the big thing? You'd say the freshman again. So really it does hinge on the play of that backcourt. It's so young. It's so inexperienced. It's so hard to tell you what's going to happen. I think that's the most exciting part of it and the scariest.
And we would probably be saying the same thing even if Dior Johnson was still here. Which is
You're absolutely right, we would.
Which is partially concerning and partially relieving at the same time. Because you don't know what you had in Dior. You could expect him to be a good player. You could expect Jalen Lowe, Carlton Carrington, Ish Leggett, Marlon Barnes, the freshman, and the backcourt to be good, but you don't know as of right now. So a lot of the early season is going to tell what these guys could be. And they're pretty easy matchups to start the season with, so you would hope it gets off on the right foot.
I'll say with Johnson, there'd probably be a little bit more expectation on the season.
Mm-hmm.
Overall. I would think there would be a little bit more overall, this is where we expect to finish type thing. And I think, at least for me, I would still be telling people I think it's probably a 7 to 10 slot in the ACC team.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's a big talent to lose, and I know that hurts. And I think Papa Conte hurts a lot more than people are giving it credit for, too. That was somebody I was super excited to see.
Well, that hurts Jorge Diaz-Graham more than anybody to me. Because now you can comfortably say, okay, Guillermo's going to slide into the 5. But now Jorge, what do you do with them? Because I wouldn't have expected Jorge to get many minutes this year anyway. But now you kind of have to figure out, is he going to be your stretch 4 off the bench? Or is he going to be the 5 and Guillermo's going to play the 4? So you kind of have to tinker, I think, more with Jorge than anything else because of, Papa Conte being in is just plug Federico out, plug Papa in. And, it's almost the same thing, which is a positive. Now you kind of have to reconfigure that depth in the front court because of him. You obviously do because he's not there, but from a style standpoint and how that front court is going to play.
I will also say the first game that's on TV or the first game that you get to go to, you will be impressed by the way Guillermo has filled out. It don't look the same. Remember, it kind of looked like, somebody was just swinging tree branches around on the the half court.
Those twins bulked up. So did Federico.
Yep. So I think we're not talking about the same front court you watched last year trying to dominate the paint. We're talking about 3 boys that are much more fleshed out, and I think have the ability to maybe start taking over some games.
I agree with you. Good stuff today, Gary. Pitt, Louisville, Saturday should be interesting. Top 15 team coming to town. Christian Veilleux era apparently begins. Then we're on to Wake Forest the week after that. So we are out of the bye week. Pitt has a new quarterback. Let's see how it goes.
Hey, real good talking basketball and football with you, Corey, and everybody that joined us. Thank you very much. We'll be back next week. We'll end the show the way we always do, H2P.